Chapter 7 of Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 5. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 5 by John Hay and John George Nicolay. Chapter 7, Grant and Thomas in Kentucky. The opening of the year 1862 brought stirring events to the armies of the West, and in their action the name of General Grant begins to acquire a special prominence and value. In the early stage of military organization in the West, when so many volunteer colonels were called to active duty in the field, the West Point education of Grant and his practical campaign training in the Mexican War made themselves immediately felt and appreciated at the department headquarters. His usefulness and superiority were evinced by the clearness and brevity of his correspondence, the correctness of routine reports and promptness of their transmission, the pertinence and practical quality of his suggestions, the readiness and fertility of expedient with which he executed orders. Anyone reading over his letters of this first period of his military service is struck by the fact that through him something was always accomplished. There was absence of excuse, complaint, or delay, always the report of a task performed. If his means or supplies were imperfect, he found or improvised the best available substitute. If he could not execute the full requirement, he performed so much of it as was possible. He always had an opinion, and that opinion was positive, intelligible, practical. We find, therefore, that his allotted tasks from the first continually rose in importance. He gained in authority and usefulness not by solicitation or intrigue, but by services rendered. He was sent to more and more difficult duties, to larger supervision, to heavier responsibilities. From guarding a station at Mexico on the North Missouri Railroad to protecting a railroad terminus near Ironton in southeast Missouri, from there to brief inspection duty at Jefferson City, then to the command of the military district of southeast Missouri, finally to the command of the great military depot and rendezvous at Cairo, Illinois, with its several outlying posts and districts, and the supervision of its complicated details about troops, arms, and supplies to be collected and forwarded in all directions. Clearly, it was not chance which brought him to such duties, but his fitness to perform them. It was from the vantage ground of this enlarged command that he had checkmated the rebel occupation of Columbus by seizing Paducah and Smithland, and from Cairo he also organized and led his first command in field fighting at what is known as the Battle of Belmont. Just before Fremont was relieved, and while he was in the field in nominal pursuit of Price, he had ordered Grant to clear southeastern Missouri of guerrillas, with the double view of restoring local authority and preventing reinforcements to Price. Movements were progressing to this end when it became apparent that the rebel stronghold at Columbus was preparing to send out a column. Grant organized an expedition to counteract this design, and on the evening of November 6 left Cairo with about 3,000 men on transports under convoy of 2 gunboats, and steamed down the river. Upon information gained while on his route, he determined to break up a rebel camp at Belmont Landing, on the Missouri shore opposite Columbus, as the best means of making his expedition effective. On the morning of the 7th, he landed his troops at Hunter's Point, 3 miles above Belmont, and marched to a favorable place for attack back of the rebel encampment, which was situated in a large open field and was protected on the land side by a line of abatis. By the time Grant reached his position, the rebel camp, originally consisting of a single regiment, had been reinforced by 5 regiments from Columbus under General Pillow. A deliberate battle with about equal forces ensued. Though the Confederate line courageously contested the ground, the Union line, steadily advancing, swept the rebels back, penetrating the abatis and gaining the camp of the enemy, who in disorder took shelter under the steep river bank. Grant's troops had gained a complete and substantial victory, but they now frittered it away by a disorderly exultation. The record does not show who was responsible for the unmilitary conduct, but it quickly brought its retribution. Before the Unionists were aware of it, General Polk had sent an additional reinforcement of several regiments across the river and hurriedly marched them to cut off the Federal retreat, which instead of an orderly march from the battlefield became a hasty scramble to get out of danger. Grant himself, unaware that the few companies left as a guard near the landing had already embarked, remained on shore to find them, and encountered instead the advancing rebel line. Discovering his mistake, he rode back to the landing, where his horse slid down the river bank on its haunches and trotted on board a transport over a plank thrust out for him. Belmont was a drawn battle, or rather it was first a victory for the Federals and then a victory for the Confederates. The courage and the loss were nearly equal, 79 killed and 289 wounded on the Union side, 105 killed and 419 wounded on the Confederate side. Brigadier General McClernand, second in command in the Battle of Belmont, was a fellow townsman of the President, and to him Lincoln wrote the following letter of thanks and encouragement to the troops engaged. This is not an official but a social letter. You have had a battle, and without being able to judge as to the precise measure of its value, I think it is safe to say that you and all with you have done honor to yourselves and the flag and service to the country. Most gratefully do I thank you and them. In my present position, I must care for the whole nation, but I hope it will be no injustice to any other State for me to indulge a little home pride that Illinois does not disappoint us. I have just closed a long interview with Mr. Washburne, in which he has detailed the many difficulties you and those with you labor under. Be assured we do not forget or neglect you. Much, very much, goes undone, but it is because we have not the power to do it faster than we do. Some of your forces are without arms, but the same is true here, and at every other place where we have considerable bodies of troops. The plain matter of fact is, our good people have rushed to the rescue of the Government faster than the Government can find arms to put into their hands. It would be agreeable to each division of the army to know its own precise destination, but the Government cannot immediately nor inflexibly at any time determine as to all, nor if determined can it tell its friends without at the same time telling its enemies. We know you do all as wisely and well as you can, and you will not be deceived if you conclude the same is true of us. Please give my respects and thanks to all. Belmont having been a mere episode, it drew after it no further movement in that direction. Grant and his command resumed their routine work of neighborhood police and observation. Buell and Halleck, both coming to their departments as new commanders shortly afterwards, were absorbed with difficulties at other points. Secession was not yet quieted in Kentucky. The Union troops at Cairo, Paducah, Smithland, and other river towns yet stood on the defensive, fearing rebel attack, rather than preparing to attack rebels. Columbus and Bowling Green were the principal Confederate camps, and attracted and received the main attention of the Union commanders. The first noteworthy occurrence following Belmont, as well as the beginning of the succession of brilliant Union victories which distinguished the early months of the year 1862, was the Battle of Mill Springs in eastern Kentucky. The earnest desire of President Lincoln and General McClellan that a Union column should be sent to seize and hold East Tennessee, and the reluctance and neglect of General Buell to carry out their wishes, have been described. General Thomas remained posted in eastern Kentucky, hoping that he might be called upon to form his column and lead it through the Cumberland Gap to Knoxville. But the weeks passed by, and the orders which he received only tended to scatter his few regiments for local defense and observation. With the hesitation of the Union Army at this point, the Confederates became bolder. Brigadier General F. K. Zollicoffer established himself in a fortified camp on the north bank of the Cumberland River, where he could at the same time defend Cumberland Gap and incite Eastern Kentucky to rebellion. Here he became so troublesome that Buell found it necessary to dislodge him, and late in December sent General Thomas orders to that effect. Thomas was weak in numbers, but strong in vigilance and courage. He made a difficult march during the early weeks of January, 1862, and halted at Logan's Cross Roads, within 10 miles of the rebel camp, to await the junction of his few regiments. The enemy, under Zollicoffer and his district commander, George B. Crittenden, resolved to advance and crush him before he could bring his force together. Thomas prepared and accepted battle. The enemy had made a fatiguing night march of 9 miles through a cold rain and over muddy roads. On the morning of January 19, the battle was begun with spirit and soon had a dramatic incident. The rebel commander, Zollicoffer, mistaking a Union regiment, rode forward and told its commanding officer, Colonel Speed S. Fry, that he was firing upon friends. Fry, not aware that Zollicoffer was an enemy, turned away to order his men to stop firing. At this moment, one of Zollicoffer's aides rode up, and seeing the true state of affairs, drew his revolver and began firing at Fry, wounding his horse. Fry, wheeling in turn, drew his revolver and returned the fire, shooting Zollicoffer through the heart. The fall of the rebel commander served to hasten and complete the defeat of the Confederates. They retreated in disorder to their fortified camp at Mill Springs. Thomas ordered immediate pursuit, and the same night invested their camp and made preparations to storm their intrenchments the following morning. When day came, however, it was found that the rebels had crossed the Cumberland River during the night, abandoning their wounded, 12 pieces of artillery, many small arms, and extensive supplies, and had fled in utter dispersion to the mountains. It was one of the most remarkable Union victories of the war. General Thomas's forces consisted of a little over 6 regiments, those of Crittenden and Zollicoffer of over 10 regiments. It was more than a defeat for the Confederates. Their army was annihilated, and Cumberland Gap once more stood exposed, so that Buell might have sent a Union column and taken possession of eastern Tennessee with but feeble opposition. It is possible that the brilliant opportunity would at last have tempted him to comply with the urgent wishes of the President and the express orders of the General-in-Chief, had not unexpected events in another quarter diverted his attention and interest. There was everywhere, about the months of December 1861 and January 1862, a perceptible increase of the Union armies by fresh regiments from the Northern States, a better supply of arms through recent importations, an increase of funds from new loans, and the delivery for use of various war materials, the product of the summer's manufacture. Of prime importance to the military operations which centered at Cairo was the completion and equipment of the new gunboats. A word of retrospect concerning this arm of the military service is here necessary. Commander John Rodgers was sent West in the month of May, 1861, to begin the construction of war vessels for Western rivers. Without definite plans, he had purchased and hastily converted and armed as best he could 3 river steamers. These were put into service in September. They were provided with cannon, but had no iron plating. They were the Tyler of 7 guns, the Lexington of 6 guns, and the Conestoga of 3 guns. Making Cairo their central station, they served admirably in the lighter duties of river police, in guarding transports, and in making hasty trips of reconnaissance. For the great expedition down the Mississippi, projected during the summer and fall of 1861, a more powerful class of vessels was provided. The distinguished civil engineer James B. Eads designed and was authorized to build 7 new gunboats to carry 13 guns each and to be protected about the bows with iron plating capable of resisting the fire of heavy artillery. They were named the Cairo, Carondelet, Cincinnati, Louisville, Mound City, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis. 2 additional gunboats of the same type of construction, but of larger size, the Benton of 16 guns and the Essex of 5 guns, were converted from other vessels about the same time. At the time Commodore Foote finally accepted the first 7, January 15, 1862, it was found impossible to supply them with crews of Eastern seamen. Resort was had to Western steamboat men and also to volunteers from infantry recruits. The joint reconnaissance of Grant and Foote to Fort Henry on the Tennessee River, January 14, has been related. A second examination was made by General C. F. Smith, who on January 22 reported that he had been within 2 miles and a half of the fort, that the river had risen 14 feet since the last visit, giving a better opportunity to reconnoiter. More important, that the high water had drowned out a troublesome advance battery, and that, in his opinion, 2 ironclad gunboats could make short work of it. It is evident that, possessed of this additional information, Grant and Foote immediately resolved upon vigorous measures. Grant had already asked permission to visit Halleck at St. Louis. This was given, but Halleck refused to entertain his project of an attack. So firmly convinced was Grant, however, that his plan was good, that, though unsuccessful at first, he quickly renewed the request. Commanding General Grant and myself telegraphed Foote to Halleck, January 28, 1862, are of opinion that Fort Henry on the Tennessee River can be carried with 4 ironclad gunboats and troops to permanently occupy. Have we your authority to move for that purpose when ready? To this Grant on the same day added the direct proposal, with permission I will take Fort Henry on the Tennessee and establish and hold a large camp there. It would appear that no immediate answer was returned, for on the following day Grant renewed his proposition with more emphasis. It is easy to perceive what produced the change in Halleck's mind. Grant's persistent urging was evidently the main influence, but 2 other events contributed essentially to the result. The first was the important victory gained by Thomas at Mill Springs in eastern Kentucky on January 19, the certain news of which was probably just reaching him. The second was a telegram from Washington informing him that General Beauregard, with 15 regiments from the Confederate Army in Virginia, was being sent to Kentucky to be added to Johnston's army. I was not ready to move, explains Halleck afterwards, but deemed best to anticipate the arrival of Beauregard's forces. It is well also to remember in this connection that 3 days before, President Lincoln's General War Order No. 1 had been published, ordering a general movement of all the armies of the Union on the coming 22nd of February. Whatever induced it, the permission now given was full and hearty. Make your preparations to take and hold Fort Henry, Halleck telegraphed to Grant on the 30th of January. I will send you written instructions by mail. Grant and Foote had probably already begun their preparation. Receiving Halleck's instructions on February 1, Grant on the following day started his expedition of 15,000 men on transports, and Foote on the 4th accompanied him with 7 gunboats for convoy and attack. Their plan contemplated a bombardment by the fleet from the river and assault on the land side by the troops. For this purpose, General McClernand, with a division, was landed 4 miles below the fort on February 4. They made a reconnaissance on the 5th, and being joined by another division under General Smith, were ordered forward to invest the fort on the 6th. This required a circuitous march of 8 miles, during which the gunboats of Flag Officer Foote, having less than half the distance to go by the river, moved on and began the bombardment. The capture proved easier than was anticipated. General Lloyd Tilghman, the Confederate commander of the fort, had early that morning sent away his 3,000 infantry to Fort Donelson, being convinced that he was beset by an overpowering force. He kept only one company of artillerists to work the 11 river guns of the fort. With these he defended the work about 2 hours, but without avail. Foote's 4 iron-plated gunboats steamed up boldly within 600 yards. The bombardment, though short, was well sustained on both sides, and not without its fluctuating chances. 2 of the heaviest guns in the fort were soon silenced, one bursting and the other being rendered useless by an accident with the priming wire. At this point a rebel shot passed through the casemate and boiler of the gunboat Essex, and she drifted helplessly out of the fight. But the remaining gunboats continued their close and fierce attack, and 5 more of the rebel guns being speedily disabled, General Tilghman hauled down his flag and went on board to surrender the fort. McClernand's troops from the land side soon after entered the work and took formal possession. On the same day Grant telegraphed to Halleck, "Fort Henry is ours," and his dispatch bore yet another significant announcement eminently characteristic of the man: "I shall take and destroy Fort Donelson on the 8th." Chapter 8.